Go ahead. Record. So I am Lisa Klein with the Agriculture Natural Resources team at UJ Extension in Gwinnett County. And I do the In the Garden webinar series, which could be all sorts of things, things that are in the garden and things that might not be in the garden, a lot of different stuff. So, most people who like to tune into these kinds of webinars and presentations love to learn. And that's what it's all about, learning a little bit about all sorts of different things. And hey, if you play trivia, you might learn some interesting stuff you can use there. Let's go ahead and get started. So, again, as I'd mentioned, that this particular presentation is a part of the University of Georgia Extension Services Georgia Green Landscapes program, which is funded by the Center for Urban Agriculture. And this, besides just being a really neat program that gives you a really cool sign to hang in your yard, teaches folks about the importance of protecting our natural resources. It's not just about pollinators, it's about everything. It's a holistic approach. So, water conservation in the landscape. This is a very timely presentation. I will tell you that. Now, I have to put these presentations in anywhere from 3 to 6 months prior to when you see them. So this was actually put in prior to the state of Georgia saying that we're like in a level 2 drought, that which is not good. We're getting a little bit of rain. We had a little bit of a sprinkle at my house today, but we're hoping for a lot more. So it's very important that we understand that water is a precious resource. It's something that we can't always rely on to be regular in our day-to-day lives. I mean, it's great when it falls out of the sky, but we don't have a ton of control over how much, where, when, and all the things. So we should always be good stewards in our environment and trying to conserve. It could be something as simple as if you have an irrigation system, get yourself a rain sensor so that it's not going off in the middle of a rainstorm, things like that. But of course, all sorts of other things, and we'll go into that. So, water, of course, is a very valuable natural resource. Um, it's just something that I think we as citizens in the US should be more proactive about. So, let's learn a little bit more about that. So, Georgia's rainfall. Now, as an average in annual precipitation, Georgia gets a pretty good amount of rainfall. A lot of times people will think about, let's use the breadbasket. That's the Midwest as a comparison. And we have a lot of agriculture up in the Midwest. That's where a vast majority of our field crops come from: corn, beans, all the things. And their average rainfall is somewhere around 35, 36 inches of rain a year, which seems like an awful lot. I mean, that's 3 feet, right? But then you look at Georgia's annual average precipitation. And here in Gwinnett County, that would be somewhere between 50 to 60 inches of rainfall a year. That's a lot of rain. Now, that's because a lot of it is we get tropical storms that dump a lot of rain in our vicinity. We also get a lot of pop-up thunderstorms that can dump a lot of rain. Atlanta had one of those yesterday, 4 inches, and the connector was underwater. So yeah, these things pop up, and over time, over if you average over the course of the year, that adds up to somewhere between 50 and 60 inches. If you look up in the very northeastern part of the state, up there where we touch North and South Carolina, that area is actually considered a temperate rainforest. Sky Valley, Georgia, which is probably the most, well, furthest northeast city in Dillard in Georgia, is actually considered a temperate rainforest, and they get somewhere on average of like 76 inches of rain a year. So that's actually about, oh, I'd say 20 inches more than what we get down here, and it's considerably cooler. So that's a lot of rain. Now, that doesn't mean that it all comes in a nice average where it's a couple inches a week and our grass is happy and our gardens are happy. No, it doesn't do that at all. That is not at all what Georgia weather is like. So when we talk about averages and means and things like that, please understand that it's more like a yo-yo or a roller coaster if you want to look at it that way. We might go through a rainy spell and then we'll have 3 weeks or 4 weeks with no rain at all. And that's actually normal too. So just understand that a mathematical average is not the same as what actual weather patterns are. But just note, we do have a lot of rain here. Okay, so this is back um, when we were in the drought years, way back when. I guess it's been, I don't know, what about 10 years ago, give or take? So Georgia's weather is kind of cyclical. We have a wet kind of well, and it really depends a lot on the oscillation, and so oscillation. So that's the El Nino, La Nina weather pattern. We're basically flipping from a neutral, and so neutral to a super El Nino, which is what they're calling it. And normally, a regular El Nino would give us cooler than average in the summertime and generally wetter than average. But a super El Nino can actually flip it a little bit more to where we just do cooler but drier than average. And then maybe during the winter time, we may get a little bit wetter. But so for right now, we're kind of stuck in this weird feast or famine precipitation. And that means that the drought that we started last year is intensified and may continue to do so. So we're just kind of have to kind of hang on and hope it equalizes. But you can kind of see what winter precipitation and spring, summer, fall precipitation typically would be. So, usually on an average year, our fall would be kind of dry unless we would get a tropical storm. That's our main driver of precipitation. Spring, we'll get our sometime after January and February, it starts to rain. We'll get these Gulf systems that come through. We'll get 1 to 3 inches, which is great, good soaking rain. And then we start with spring thunderstorms, and that's our storm season. And we'll get another one of those in the fall, so we'll get some fall thunderstorms at about the same time. And then winter typically will bring us these Gulf systems that drop a lot of precipitation on us. And then summer are pop-up storms. So those can be very spotty. Understand that some people think they live under a dome and they don't get a lot of precipitation, but it does end up averaging out over the course of the year. So, soil moisture from rain and irrigation is obviously lost during evaporation and plant transpiration, evapotranspiration. So the plant will suck that moisture up and then release it out into the atmosphere via the stomata in its leaves. And temperature is also a main mm, variable in there as to how much is actually lost at any given time, both for evaporation and evapotranspiration. So you can go here to weather.uga.edu and you can actually watch in real time. They're kind enough to post this for us. They also have temperature graphs, and you can see what temperature your soil is. All the things. This is a really good site for you to bookmark. And you can go there and you can actually see what potential evapotranspiration might be. And again, as I mentioned, that's there's some temperature dependence on there. So if it's really super hot, you're going to see a lot more of that. So that might tell you you need to water a little bit more. You may want to hold off on actually planting something that you were thinking of planting. A lot of things. It gives you the ability to kind of plan in advance. So irrigation is necessary to keep our lawns, all of our plants and everything else watered and appropriately growing. Most plants, like our vegetables and our other things like that, are going to need about an inch of water every week, right? And it is so much better to go ahead and water once deeply during that week than it is to come out every day or every other day and water for 10 minutes because that water isn't going to seep into the ground very well. So that's basically just learning how to water appropriately. There are a lot of different things that you can, guidelines and principles and all the things that you can learn about and how to conserve water. That certainly is one of them, and we'll go through some others. So, planting designs for water conservation. So, the main thing that Extension tries to espouse is the appropriateness of where you're putting your plants. And I'm sure many of you have heard right plant, right place, so much so that you're like, ah, right plant, right place. Yes, get your tags and look. I know a lot of us love going to the nursery and we see some plant that catches our eye and we want that, right? But you got to make sure that you have the appropriate place to put that. So don't go and get a hydrangea and put that in the hot sun up by your mailbox just because you think it's pretty and you want to come home and see that all the time. Because unless you've got a whole bunch of trees at your mailbox, that hydrangea is probably not going to be long for this world. They're an understory plant and they need a lot of shade. So if you don't have that up there, it's not going to do well. So right plant, right place is very instrumental in conserving water correctly in your landscape. So, certain plants have accommodations for being able to be in the full sun. They may have waxier leaves, they may have fuzzier leaves. Hydrangeas don't have that. Hellebores don't necessarily have that. Plants that are adapted to live in the shade don't have those kinds of things as plants that are adapted more for the sun and do better in the sun. So if you're going to purchase something, make sure you flip that tag over and you look and you see, can I accommodate this plant in a spot where it needs? You have to know the sun and the shade requirements. You got to know the water. That's another one. Some plants need a lot of water. Some not so much, and they're fine in dry shade, but you need to make sure that you can accommodate. And then soil drainage, of course. We have a lot of clay soil here, but if you plant in some forested areas, you may be dealing with a very sandy loam, which drains too fast. And if you put something that needs a lot of water in there, then you're constantly going to be fighting with that plant because any water that you do put in there, it's just going to drain right through. So wherever you're putting your plants, understand not only the sun and shade requirements, the water requirements, um, the soil drainage and necessary organic needs of the soil, but you also have to kind of just take into account, is this plant good for this particular hardy zone? Just because it's sold at the nursery doesn't mean that it's perfect for this climate either. So that's another thing. So let's talk about placement. So when you're putting plants in the ground, there's a lot of things you need to into account. If you just bought a new house and you're looking at it like a blank slate, maybe it doesn't have a whole lot of landscaping. You want to try to picture, and this may mean that you get out there when it's raining with your umbrella and you video and you want to see, where does that rain go? Does it run down the hills in my backyard? And does it settle in a low area in the back? All the things. You've got to figure out where the water flows, where it pools. That might be a prime location for a rain garden and plants that enjoy being wet or having wet feet. Some things like junipers don't like that kind of stuff. So you need to make sure that you're evaluating that with regards to where the plant would be happiest. But again, put your plants with higher water needs in lower elevations where water might saturate, and just be smart about it. So the other thing that you want to take into account is grouping plants with similar water needs. So as I mentioned, right plant, right place. Some plants, especially plants that thrive or do very well in riparian areas. Riparian just basically means an area, a marginal area along a body of water. That can be a stream, a river, a pond, any of the things, right? So if you have plants that prefer shade, moist, and rich soil, then if you have ferns or hostas, plants like that really appreciate those conditions and do much better in those conditions, that's really what you should be planting there. You really shouldn't go out and get some coneflowers or some black-eyed Susans and put them in the same location because they're not going to be very happy. Those two types of plants prefer full sun and they're fairly tolerant of dry conditions once established. So if you put them in a perpetually wet and shady location, they're not going to do very well. In fact, they're probably going to go downhill and you're just not going to see them after a few years. So, right plant, right place. Placement and species selection. So, you also need to think about the topography and soil type. We have a lot of transplants here, folks that come from the Midwest, from the Northeast, from out West. And if you have previously lived in a location that is much more temperate in climate than where we are now, we'll use Washington State as an example, right? So we actually do have some zone 7 out in Washington State. Washington State does wonderful at growing fruit and it's very temperate. If you're at elevation, say like 3,000 to 5,000 feet, maybe up to 8,000 feet above sea level, it's nice during the summer. It's very dry. That's typically their dry season, and then it'll pick back up and start raining again at the end of the summer. But it's very seasonally cool, if you will. Nothing at all like what Georgia is in the summer. So out there, you may choose to have some type of stone, maybe river stone, or sometimes people favor that white granite. I'm not a big favor of that. Um, but they may have like a rock garden kind of thing going on. And they may put Japanese maples in full sun. I've seen this, I've seen pictures of it, and in the front yard on a hillside, similar to what you see here. And they may have some succulents and some other things in there. But then after they've been there for a while, the trees start to die back and they'll note that there's the leaves are really stunted and they're struggling. They just look really unhappy and they don't understand why. And one of the main drivers here is just the sheer temperature that we deal with as compared to someplace up north. So here we're in zone 8A. Or, you might be, if you're a little bit further north up in the mountains in the northern part of the Atlanta metro area, you might be zone 7, or even, I think we still have some 6Bs, maybe in some of the higher elevations up in the mountain counties. But you certainly go down into the nines and not so much. I think 9 is basically the threshold down in South Georgia. But, we get a string of 100-degree days in the summertime. What happens to all of that heat? It gets caught in that rock. It'll cook the root system of that tree and anything else that you put in there, with the exception of plants that live in that particular type of environment. So if you have some plants from Arizona, if you have yucca, if you have some succulents, maybe some cacti, things like that, they're probably going to do okay because they're used to that environmental condition. They can tolerate that. But Japanese maples are meant to be more of a part shade type tree. They are not meant to be in full sun. They're not meant to have their roots in hot rock that absorbs the heat and then, radiates it at night. So the tree struggles and everything else in there that might do much better if you had just a layer of mulch, it's all going to struggle unless it's something that can tolerate that particular type of condition. So I say all of that so that you understand that the type of material that you use in your landscape and your hardscape makes all the difference in the world. So if you're dealing with a house that has a full sun environment backyard, you might want to not choose unless you have a rain garden need. That's completely different. But what I'm talking about here is just some type of the same mulch. In this case, it would be stone that you see here. You might want to consider using some type of mulch that is not a stone or hardscape, something like, pine straw or cypress mulch or pine bark mulch, something like that. Something that will not absorb the heat and then reflect it back. Plant some trees and shrubs in your landscape. I can't emphasize that enough. Uh, I live in a house and I do complain about it because the canopy over my house is closed. So I have so many trees that I really have lost the ability to have sun-loving plants in my yard. Now I have an area out in the back of my property. I have little over an acre, and I can plant out there because it's power line right of way, and I have a garden out there, and it's fine. But I can't do much in the way of sunny plants here anywhere around my house because I don't have enough sun. I just don't. So I specialize in shade loving plants like hostas, bear's ears, cast iron plant, things that can tolerate full or nearly full shade because I just don't have it anymore. And that's okay. But that also helps with energy savings in your house. And so anytime you think about what you're planting, you always want to kind of take into account what your environment is. So if you desire to have some savings in your heating and air bill, then consider putting some trees in. And also that'll give you some variability in what you can plant. Because there are a lot of plants that do tolerate part sun. They just don't tolerate full sun. So this will give you a kind of a bigger variety to choose from. Trees are also great for water conservation. Once they're established, they don't need a lot of irrigation. And as I mentioned, they'll cut down on the amount of water that the rest of your yard uses. Now, I'm not a fan of all turf lawns. They're great in the case of a golf course, but in my opinion, you want to zone things so that you have a variety of plants, especially natives. Natives are great because they've lived and thrived and evolved in this area, and they do very well when they're planted in the correct place. You don't have to really worry about them as much, and they look great in the landscape. So basically, here you want to reduce moisture. Evaporation and transpiration, and shading the ground is going to do that. All you have to do in the middle of the summer here is sit under a tree for a little bit and then get up and walk out into the hot sunshine, and you can tell the temperature differential, 10 degrees sometimes. I mean, and it may be humid, but at least you're in the shade. So incorporate some drought tolerant plants that are appropriate for wherever you live. So if you're in South Georgia and you're watching this, you're going to be looking at probably some more tropical, semi-tropical type plants than what we would be looking at up here in the metro area or up into the mountains. And if you're looking at out from outside this state, thank you for attending. You're going to be looking at plants that may be completely different than what we would find here. And that's okay. You just want to make sure that you are looking at plants that are appropriate for where you live. And so your local extension agency, no matter where you are, every single state has an extension. We have NC State, we have Clemson, we have University of Florida, we have Auburn, we have Texas A&M, University of Illinois. I mean, all of those have extension services, and each county has their own extension office. So you can always reach out to extension. Most of them will have a publication very specifically for native plants for that particular state. So this is a great place. You've got UGAs here, and you can just search for native plants and it'll pop up. And just note that some gardens might require different types of plants. If your backyard ends in a stream, then you've got riparian area along there. You might be looking for something completely different than your neighbor down the way that has a wide open sunny lot that sits kind of up on a hill. So make sure when you're looking at those plants, they're tolerant of the conditions on your home site or container. So practicing xeriscaping. So I know it makes you think of the high desert because that's at least that's what I picture in my mind when I think of that. Xeros means dry, and that's not necessarily the case. That doesn't mean that you have to have a fake lawn on your front lawn and astroturf, or that it's all stone or hardscape or whatever they want to get you to do, like out west. Out west, where you have to practice water conservation, yes. Out there, you are looking at a landscape more like that, where I put the X over the the photo. But here you obviously get a lot more rainfall, and so you don't have to be that much of a water conserver, but you do still need to practice those water conserving techniques because we have up and down rainfall. There is no average where it's nice and just a straight line. It's like this, and that's everywhere. So choosing the right plants again. And there's lots of publications out there about xeriscaping and giving you all sorts of really good ideas on that. I just did a presentation. I believe it's uploaded on the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, and you can check out some stuff there about xeriscaping. But I've done several webinars where we talk about that a little bit more in depth. Management practices. So if you have turf, and most everybody that's in suburbia and or urban areas does have some turf, even if it's just a small little bit of turf, you want to make sure that the health of those plants that and we talk about it in the same way that we talk about trees, the canopy, which is the turf grass that's growing up from the root system, and then the blades of the grass, that's the canopy. We want that grass to be as healthy as it possibly can be. You don't want any type of fungal issues or bacterial issues, root rot, dieback. You don't want any of that. You want to keep it as healthy as possible. So, in doing so, get yourself a soil test. UGA Extension does those $8, and Gwinnett County might be a little bit more if you're in a different county, but it's valuable because it tells you what nutrients you're lacking and if you need to adjust your pH. Grass likes to be in the 6.2 to 6.8 range of the pH scale. You might be less than that, right? So you need to add some lime to make it a little bit happier. But when your grass is happy and it's healthy, it's going to respond better to drought situations. So right now, we're not getting regular rain. If you don't have an irrigation system, you want it to be healthier. You want it to be happier. And if you can't water it all the time, at least make sure that it's healthy otherwise. So consider aerating your lawn at least once a year. And I mean, that could be something as simple as you walk around in those little spiky shoes, or you pay your lawn care company to come out and they'll, run the spikes over it and you'll get these little divots and then, you can kind of rake those off. But what that does is that adds in a little bit more air to the root system. It helps that water get down through there. And then that root system will invigorate and it will start to grow better. So it can tolerate these up and down water cycles more if it's healthy. Using mulch. I can't say how much I think this is such a good idea. I use mulch everywhere around here. Now, I have a lot of pine trees, so I'm able to get a lot of pine straw and just kind of distribute that. Sometimes I don't even have to push it around. It just falls and it's great. I also have a lot of trees, so I have a lot of leaves, and I tend to use that where I don't have a lot of pines, and I'll move that around a little bit. So there's lots of benefits to just using what you have, but if it needs to look a little nicer, that's okay too. You can get pine bark mulch, you can get cypress mulch. Cypress mulch lasts a little bit longer. There's lots of chip drop. If you don't care if it looks fancy, you can use chipdrop.com, and the tree companies, when they're out, doing their tree trimming or whatever, they will come and drop it off in your driveway or wherever you wish. Now it's a dump truck load, so just make sure you have a place to put it and you're prepared to move it around. But it's free mulch. So yeah, that's a great thing. I've used it quite a few years now and had probably 2 or 3 loads, and it's great. So just make sure that if you do, you're putting it around your plants. Don't dig it down into your garden, your vegetable garden. So some people ask, can I kind of put that into the soil? No, don't do that, because what'll happen is it'll become a nitrogen sink, and the little bacteria, fungi, all the other things, the decomposers, will start to break down that wood cellulose, and it will pull the nitrogen out of the soil, and your plants won't be happy. So they'll start looking yellow and anemic and really unhappy, right? Don't do that. Just put it on the surface. You can put it around the plant. Leave an area clear from around the base of the plant, whether that be a woody plant like a small tree, or black-eyed Susans or whatever else you're growing. And that's to deter rodents, voles specifically, from being able to get down to the root system. You want to put the mulch out, and it will eventually work its way into the soil column, thanks to all of the little critters that live in there, including worms. But you don't want to put it up too close to a trunk or any other type of woody plant or even a vegetative plant, because that invites all of the little critters, um, the little varmints, if you will, the voles, to get in there and nibble, chipmunks to nibble on things that they're not supposed to. So we just keep them honest. Adding organic matter to sandy or clay soils to increase the infiltration. So in South Georgia, the soils are pretty sandy. And so you're probably wishing you had more clay like we do up here in North Georgia. Up here, we're wishing we had more sand in there. Well, the good news is you can amend your soils no matter what. So if you have very, very heavy clay soils that are like 70% clay, that's okay. So you can just get some good old compost. You can get it in bags at the store. And then you can get some sand, be it playbox sand or builder's sand, which is a little coarser and irregular, sometimes better. And you can just kind of mix that all together. Get a tiller, till that all in. If you're going to make um, an ornamental bed around the edge of the woods. You can even just lay it over the top of the existing ground. I mean, there's all sorts of things that you can do, but that's going to add some good context to the soil, and that will allow your root system to grow into that. It'll be a lot happier. It won't be compacted. It'll hold moisture better. And don't forget your mulch on top. Avoiding soil compaction. So one thing that we have to be careful of, if you have a property that doesn't have sidewalks, or that you have multiple cars and you don't have room to park all those cars in your driveway, sometimes people get into the bad habit of pulling onto areas under trees and parking where the root system is. No, God, this is not a good thing to do, because what that's doing is that's compacting the soil down around the root system, and trees breathe through their roots. So if you compact that soil down, that's going to make it harder and harder for those trees to extract that oxygen that they need so badly to survive and thrive from the soil. So here you see a tree protection zone. So these, in municipalities that have an arborist on staff, what they'll do is when there's a new building permit, they'll actually come out and they'll put an exclusion zone around the root zone of the tree, and that's to protect that tree. You can see the one here in the background. It's probably a couple hundred years old, or 100, at least 150 years old, and you don't want to lose that. That's a very valuable piece of your property. Not only is it providing all sorts of shade and energy efficiency, but it also is providing a place to live for birds and critters, and you get all those leaves. You've got the oxygen benefits and the evapotranspiration and all of that. It's a very, very valuable thing. So having a nice, established, healthy tree on your property is just beyond beneficial. So we want to protect them. So avoiding soil compaction, don't drive under trees if you can at all help it. Don't do that. And trying to prevent, you know, trying to think of what the best way to say it. Basically, just you want rainwater to be able to infiltrate in there, and also the soil compaction can help prevent that. You don't want to do that. We have enough problems with yo-yo rain around here that you really want to make sure that those trees have every single possibility of succeeding as you can. So in the heat of the summer, sometimes people go out there and they mow their grass. If you've got zoysia, you're probably looking at like 2.5 inches. Maybe sometimes Bermuda, three-ish, somewhere in there. If you're mowing your grass every single week, then that's probably what you're doing. Some of us, me, we don't cut our grass that often. And in the summer months, when it's a little hotter, maybe we're not seeing as much rainfall, you want to let your grass grow a little taller. That's going to help protect that soil moisture, because that additional canopy up at the top, that's going to have a kind of a humidity barrier there, and that's actually a good thing. So if it's a little Hotter and drier than normal, consider letting your grass grow just a smidge taller. And if you can, use a mulching more. And that's because what it'll do is it'll chop the pieces of grass up so that that falls down underneath into the root zone, and that'll start to decompose and add nutrients back and protect soil moisture. So I've already mentioned installing rain sensors if you have irrigation systems. There's a lot of people that don't want to invest that extra money. I get it, but if you want to do good things for the environment, this is one thing that you can do that definitely will. A lot of businesses are really bad about this. They just aren't aware and they don't care. But this not only would it save money, but it's also, again, in a time maybe where, your water source, which in this case, if you're in Gwinnett, would be Lake Lanier, is dropping. This is going to help protect that water source. So if this drought does drag on and it goes many years, which we have in the past, we still have rain and or sorry, we still have water. We still have drinking water because honestly, that's more important than, keeping the hydrangeas up at the front of the entrance water. So again, not everybody has a sprinkler system, but if you do, make sure you maintain it. So maintaining that, making sure your pressure is appropriate, making sure that you have all of the heads adjusted so that you're not just spraying water up into the air. Like, I mean, the kids will love to run through that, right? But that's not very good for the environment. If your sprinklers are set to go off at like 1 in the afternoon, and they're just spraying up into the air like you see here, that's being evaporated. So you're paying money to have water sprayed up in the air to make it more humid. Does that make sense? I don't think it does. It's already humid enough. We don't need to add that. And it's not benefiting the grass in any way because there's very little that's reaching the root system of that turf. So if you do have a sprinkler system and you don't have somebody that maintains it more regularly, make sure you're out there and you're testing it fairly often, at least once a summer, and making sure that it's not spraying in some unusual pattern. If you have pop-ups sprinklers, you want to, again, go out there and test it, and you want to make sure that it's delivering water at the necessary pressure and in the necessary pattern that it was originally installed for. I drive past on my way to the office every morning. There's a subdivision just down the way from me in Gwinnett County, and it has a sprinkler system in the front. Half of those sprinkler heads are set wrong and they spray right out into the street. They don't do anything for the grass that's there. And nobody cares. It's really frustrating to see that. I mean, and it goes off like every day. It's such a waste of water because the grass looks horrible anyway, because all the water is going out on the street. So make sure that your landscape is getting irrigated in a uniform way and that it's calibrated correctly. And so if you're not doing it, make sure that you hire a company to come in at least once a summer, because it's easy to hit a sprinkler head or to knock it off kilter or something like that. And then, you're wasting money. So just make sure that you do that if you have a working system. Again, using a rain gauge, and this is sprinkler or no. Um, I have rain gauges. I have a couple of them set up in areas where I don't have any trees, and I monitor to see how much rain we get from every storm, and that helps me decide what I need to do for watering the landscaping that I have in the immediate area around my house. That's basically the zone where I do most of my gardening is just immediately around the house. And then I have an area out in the back where I really don't do a lot of maintenance. Those are mostly just trees. And then I'll have my vegetable garden out in the way back. And you can get, you see here, this on the left is for a sprinkler system and rain gauge, and then you have just a regular old rain gauge on the right. You can use a moisture sensor for your sprinkler system, your irrigation system. Most newer systems are going to have all sorts of really cool things that you can add to it. So yes, you can have a rain gauge, but the soil moisture sensor, now that's valuable. That can tell you if you really need to water. I can't tell you how many people call all the like every week. I might probably 3 or 4 calls from people that have issues with this year it's been trees because we've had now going on 2 years where we haven't had sufficient moisture. And some of these trees have very shallow root systems, and that's because they really didn't do a whole lot, or their irrigation system is not set up properly. It irrigates for 15, 20 minutes, very shallow, just not much pressure, it's not putting out enough gallons per minute. And so those trees have grown a very shallow root system and they can't sustain, the fact that we haven't had any water. It's much better to irrigate very deeply 1 time a week. So make sure that, like, for instance, if you're doing trees, each tree, according to caliper width, which is the width of the trunk, that it receives an inch, inch and a half or more of water. That might be 10 gallons, it might be 15 gallons per week. Most of you probably aren't doing that. So it's very important, and especially if you have a retaining wall and these trees are planted above it, you've got to make sure they get supplemental water. This is a good option to install there so that you can tell if it's super dry. You can also do it by hand. So if you're out in the garden and you're like, I think it's kind of dry, this gives you a good hand feel. Like if you like doing it the old-fashioned way, you can do this and it will give you an idea of if you need to add moisture or not. And you can get that publication there at the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, right down there. And then I've mentioned a couple times getting a soil test so that you can figure out, are you missing nutrients? Do you need to do some amending with lime? Are you sitting on an acidic soil that needs a little bit more lime, a little more sweetening, if you will? We have all sorts of different tests. We can test for elements, we can test for fertility, all the things. So if you have questions about other things that might be in the soil, like lead or arsenic or anything like that, we can also test for those. And water and forage and so on and so forth. Watering methods. So, follow whatever is recommended for each type of plant. So, we've talked about a lot of different plants like lawns, flower beds, fruits and vegetables, ground covers, shrubs, trees. They all have different requirements for what they need. Some are heavy feeders and need a lot of water. Some don't. Some may not need much, if any at all, but you really need to be educated on what you need. You just have to be very aware. Don't overwater your plants. I've mentioned a couple times how frustrating that is when you see poor watering patterns, when you see not being watered at all, when you see bad calibration. If you overwater, it can, all the things that you're putting into the soil, if you pay a lot of money for a lawn service and they come out and they're putting fertilizer down and lime, if you overwater, then you're leaching all of that down through the root zone and out. And especially if you have a real hilly lawn, yeah, you're washing all of that down. And that ends up as a non-point source pollution in our local water systems. So it's very important that you don't contribute to that as much as you possibly can. So just make sure that you're watering in whatever you need to, but don't overwater. Water the roots, not the foliage. So some people, they just overhead water like this. They just like the thought of it. It looks like rain, maybe, but that is not the most efficient way to water your plants. You always want to try to water at the base and the root system. It's really humid here, and a lot of plants will develop fungal issues or bacterial issues, both of which are made worse by water. So if you have a really high humidity, and then you get a lot of rain, or in this case, overhead watering, you might be spreading fungal spores, and then they become a problem on the plant next door. So it's important that you understand how to water properly. The roots are what need it, not the leaves. The roots need it. So make sure when you're watering, you're not wasting your time, get that water on the root system. Water deeply and infrequently. I've already mentioned this. It's so much better to have one session where you water a whole inch of water or rain, however you want to. I mean, Mother Nature does provide sometimes, into your soil. And that's so much better than two or three sessions where you water for 15 minutes, two or three times a week. So your grass, your root system on your grass or your turf is going to be very shallow at that point, and that goes also for any other plants that you have planted. It's much better to have a deep root system because that way what happens is usually you get a nice wet spring. It's nice and the moisture level goes pretty deep. And then as you start getting hotter and hotter temperatures, that top 2 to 3 inches can get pretty dry, but you still have a good bit of soil moisture down below. If you have a good deep root system, those roots can still draw from that moisture down below. But if you have a shallow root system, it's really going to suffer because you don't have enough soil moisture. So that's why it's important, especially with a lot of houses around here. Developers are known to scrape the topsoil off and then sell that. And so whatever topsoil you have, topsoil you have came with your sod, and that might not be much. So it's always smart to water less frequently, but much more deeply. And this now, make sure that you are done watering. Either you're going to do it in the evening, like after fourish, and then the sun comes up in the morning, and you then have all day for that to burn off, or that you get your watering done before 10 a.m. And that's because you don't want to water in the heat of the day. That's the worst time to do it because evaporation is highest at that time. You also don't want to water during we'll say like 2 o'clock in the afternoon because the grass will still be damp by the time nightfall gets here. And then if that moisture sits on it all that time, you're more prone to fungal problems. So that's the other reason why we don't recommend watering at that time. So in 2010, the last really bad drought that we had, they came up with the Georgia Water Stewardship Act of 2010. And this was basically the normal conditions level 1, 2, and 3. And this is what we're following. So basically, right now, we're not in normal conditions, unfortunately, which stinks. We're in a drought level 1. I know it feels like we should probably be in a 2, but we're still in a 1. They have not called for a 2 yet up in the area that we're in now, and that calls for heightened awareness and conservation. So, if at all possible, make sure that you're very careful about how you're watering and you're not wasting water and all those things. When we move to a level 2, that's an odd even watering restriction. So if your address is ends in an odd number, then you are on odd numbered days of the week. Then you're going to like the first and the third and so on and so forth. That's when you would water. And then if we were to hit a level 3, that would be an emergency ban on outdoor watering completely, and you're not allowed to do it. So I just mentioned this, and this is basically from 2016 when we had a really bad level 1 and level 2 drought. And as I've mentioned, this is just bad juju. You don't want to do this. Make sure that your sprinklers are adjusted as such. There's lots of different sprinkler heads, folks. If you've got an older system, you can pay somebody to come in and do some retrofitting and change out the sprinkler head so that you're not wasting water. It's very important. Um, Timing also, you don't want to leave it running all the time. You see here the watering when it's raining out. I hate that. I almost want to go knock on somebody's door and go, turn your sprinklers off. Uh, Easily fixed by a soil moisture sensor. Easily fixed. Using drip irrigation, if you're in a vegetable garden or a raised bed, I mean, if you're in a community garden, at home in ornamentals, you can put a drip irrigation system out. They make all sorts of little systems that you can get for raised beds. You don't have to pay, thousands of dollars for an irrigation system. I mean, you can get a little kit off Amazon and put that together with a timer and that will help immensely. So you don't even have to think about it. It reduces water loss because that emitter is right at the base of the plant, and it's a lot healthier for the plant. It gets right to the root system. If you have mulch, you can do this and put the mulch over the top of it. You don't ever have to think about it. And drip irrigation does allow you to set the water to the needs of the plant. So we obviously all request that you put all like using plants together. It's just easier that way. But you can mix and match if you're willing to go the extra mile with adding the emitters to put the different amounts out. So that is an option if you want to have a lot of different types of plants with different water needs. And here's your certification checklist. So, um, basically, designing your landscape to use water efficiently and following plant requirement guidelines, basically, what's on the tag, grouping your plants with similar water needs, including all of your shade trees and shrubs, things like that. You're going to practice xeriscaping, which is just water conservation. Use drought resilient plants or natives as much as you can, mulching, and use efficient irrigation. Get yourself a soil test so that you know how healthy your soil is. Healthy plants do much better than unhealthy plants, and they're easier to keep. So, also do a soil texture test, and you can figure out what you need to do to amend the soil. Aerating your turf, that's a really good thing to do. That'll help your turf be healthier and happier and avoid soil compaction. Make sure you're adjusting your lawnmower height in the summer so that it's a little higher, and use a mulching more so that you're chopping that greenery up and adding that back into the soil column. Repair irrigation systems. Make sure that you have somebody come out and maintain those if you're using your irrigation system. Don't overwater your plants, and make sure that you're watering deeply but infrequently and at the roots if you can. Try using a drip system and try to only water between 4 p.m. and 10 a.m. And that'll allow any of that water to burn off in the sun. And this again is the Georgia Green Landscapes Stewards. This is the sign. I have this sign. It's a nice aluminum, very pretty sign. I believe it's like $17. If you go to the Georgia Green Landscape website, you can get that here either through the link that you see or the QR code that you see here. I'm happy to share the slide deck if you wish, and you can go check it out. And basically, what you're going to do is you're going to get there, and they have it's like 70 questions, and you go through all of these questions online and answer them, and you get a score. And most people who are here to learn about this probably will pass with flying colors. And if you do so, you can then request to get a little certificate, and they'll send you a certificate in the mail that says that you're now part of the Georgia Green Landscape program, and you can opt to purchase one of these lovely yard signs. And so again, there's all sorts of, I can't remember exactly how many presentations there are. I slowly work through them, and again, most of them are on the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, or they're on the website here, and you can watch them. But I do try to add them at least two or three, maybe a year, so that folks can watch them and work their way through. So that's basically it. And if anybody has any questions, I am happy to answer those. This is the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel. Over there, you can see that. I record all of these, and they will end up over there where people can watch them when they would like. I do all sorts of other classes, usually a couple in the evening and one in the on Tuesdays for a lunch and learn. Might start paring them back towards the end of the year, so I'm just doing one of each. That's mostly just because we have fewer attending in the summer and late fall. But all sorts of interesting things pop up. You never know exactly what you might get. But does anybody have any questions? If so, you can drop those in the chat box. I'll wait a second. And I'm happy to answer a question if you have something about non uh, water conservation too, if you have a question about that. No? Oh, I have new grass and some of the areas are dry. Yes. So as I mentioned before, a lot of times you don't have sufficient topsoil underneath. And that can either be if it's a new house and a new lawn because the developer scraped the topsoil off, banked it, and then sold it. That happens a lot. Topsoil is expensive, and so they want to try to maximize their profit. When sod comes to you, it has about a half an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch, if you're lucky, usually just what the roots are growing in. But that is not how deep the roots would be if you allowed it to. So they've scraped all of the topsoil off the surface, and you're left with a very hard pan, almost rocky layer that's almost impossible for a root system to grow through. So, yes, it is super important if you have a situation like that that you consider doing something called top dressing. So, top dressing basically means that you're going to um, aerate the soil or go ahead and aerate the turf. And June is about the end of when you can really get to that before you probably should wait. But going through and aerating the soil, and then you come in and usually about 3/4 of an inch, you're going to put about 3/4 of an inch of topsoil on top of that and then you water it in. And what that does is that sinks down into the root zone, and that gives your turf about 3/4 of an inch, give or take, of new topsoil that root system can grow in. And that will make that grass much more resilient and able to handle drought situations like what we're in right now. It's the lack of the root system and the inability for it to grow into that real hard pan soil that is why you're seeing some areas that seem more resilient and greener and some that don't and are very dry. And you can lose turf that way because there's just nothing out there for it to grow into or for it to get the moisture and nutrients that it needs. So consider top dressing. That's usually something we recommend if you have an older lawn that needs some renovating, but you don't want to scrape all of the sod up. So basically you aerate it, you put some new topsoil or mulch or some type of organic matter on top and then water it in. And a lot of times that's all it really needs to be a little happier and healthier. Any other questions? Well, if I don't have any more questions from anyone, and again, you're welcome to email me at this particular email, lisa.klein@gwinnettcounty.com. I hear we're going to be migrating to a gwinnettcounty.org soon, but that should be fine. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording or stop sharing. And that is it for the evening. So thank you all for attending. I appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.